I think I've always been a really creative person. I just remember as a child wanting to make things. And so, I was really fortunate to have my parents really kind of support me in that. And I did a lot of sewing. My mother was a dressmaker, and then she went on to become a welder. And my father, he was always making stuff and, finding ways to build stuff and put stuff together. So there was always, an element of like problem solving and some form of creativity in the house. So, and it just seemed that it was just a natural fit for me. And I remember when I was going to school, I thought I would probably go into fashion design or something like that, going in the city, and it didn't work out that way. And I remember going off to University of Windsor, and I started in art history. And then I guess because I wasn't making enough, I ended up switching. And so that's when I switched over into visual arts. So I'd probably say, I've always been interested in making things since a child. And it just kind of really kept with me my whole life, and it just seems like just kind of a natural part of my language. Mm-hmm. And so, I went off to do my Bachelor's of Fine Arts from the University of Windsor. So I switched over eventually from art history to visual arts. And then from there, I went off to do my graduate studies at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, which is just south of Chicago. I don't think it was necessarily very specific in terms of finding my niche within painting, sculpture, or printmaking. It was really, and I would say it was, it was conceptually, conceptual development was certainly, an integral part of the program. But it was really a blend of really trying to find the material with the conceptual voice. And so I would probably say that more so it was, for me, my niche was really about the materials, and it was really about experimenting with the materials. And I think that the school really kind of lent itself to that kind of exploration, and so that the voice would kind of evolve from there. And so I was really interested in not only the materials, but also the formal aspects of drawing as well too, which was really important to me. And I think that's where my kind of like real love for observational drawing became, such a kind of backbone for everything. And it wasn't until I got to my to do my MFA that I was in the studio painting program. And it was painting and drawing, actually. And I met a group of students, my colleagues, who were from England. And a couple of them were in the printmaking majors. So they kind of just interacting with them and talking to them, and I really gravitated towards just their process, their research process, and very different, I suppose, than what I was used to, perhaps maybe more formal, and just for their love of the printed image. And so that dialogue and that interest just started to bloom from there, and I think that's where I started to gravitate towards more of a niche when I was in graduate school. And then, through my own personal kind of understanding of the various processes within printmaking, that's where I, developed my kind of love for the process itself. I tend to use a lot of Japanese paper, and there's something that's really visceral about the paper, and it also has this duality between something very fragile and something very strong and utilitarian. It's very different than Western paper. Western paper, the fibers are very short and they're more laid like crosswise, like fabric. Whereas Japanese paper, the fibers are very long, and they can be so thin and almost, but yet they're so impenetrable, so they can actually withstand. They're very, very strong because the fibers are long and they run the length of the paper. But yet they create this kind of real translucent skin-like quality, and that appears very delicate, but it's actually quite strong. So it's quite versatile, and so there's something that's really quite beautiful about it. And the sound of it, it's very crisp, and there's like this kind of shiny, kind of onion skin quality to the surface that is really quite seductive as a material. And also, you know, when I print on it, it just really lends itself quite beautifully to the printed image on the etching. Is that the ink from the line, or the incised line, permeates through all levels of the very thin paper, but it kind of radiates a bit. So there's just really something seductive about the paper that I love. And I just really love the way that the drawn line or the printed line really sits on the paper. I'm an avid collector of things, and my studio is kind of full of little bits and bobs of various materials and objects and elements from nature. And I don't have anything specific when I'm, you know, in mind when I'm out on my kind of walk to work or my travels through the city or doing, you know, my daily errands. But, you know, there is this, you know, for me, there's this balance between kind of the city urban life and that of what the natural state exists and how it's evolved. So I'm always collecting things, whether they're bugs or they're, you know, twigs or pods or seeds of anything, and just you know, I have my camera and I'm continually taking photographs. So this is all real field work, and you know, you can kind of probably check in my pockets or my bag, or you'll see that I've collected something and I forgot to take it out. But I have, you know, I take this all back to my studio and I don't know what I'm going to do with it. It's just there, and it eventually makes its way into, you know, part of a drawing or part of a print, or, you know, I've photographed it and scanned it in, and then suddenly it becomes a pattern of some sort that I use in a screen print. But you know, that's really my field work is, you know, just kind of keeping my eye to the ground. And it's everything from picking something up that has an unusual shape, or that's, you know, a dead bug or part of a wing or a broken twig or something like that, or just noticing something that has a real peculiar placement within, you know, a particular kind of spot, and suddenly it becomes this kind of compositional kind of element that I'm drawn to, and either I have to, you know, take a picture of it, or I have to kind of record it somehow. Well, I think I'm creating this kind of real life composition in three-dimensional space, and I really don't know what it's going to necessarily entail. Like, I have an idea of what, you know, I want to, you know, cut away or draw or add, but I don't see the next thing until I have the first thing finished, and then, or the first image finished, whether it's the drawn image or a built image, or like if it's composed, or if it's like a 3D object. I can't move on to the next thing until I see that in its entirety, and so I look at that as a shape, and then something else evolves. And so then, by then I begin to take on, you know, something that is from direct observation, but also has this hybrid kind of element that's tacked on that creates a whole other entity, and then it just becomes cyclical. And then, you know, they kind of tell a story in between all. And so I think it's like the physicality of the composition. Like, I don't see the composition now as a flat space anymore, right? And trying to create this illusion. To me, it's all real, right? And it's this real fictitious environment. Well, the title Makeshift, it comes from this idea of this fragmentation of, I suppose, the environment, and how I'm really interested in this idea of taking something that's very familiar with something that's quite odd. And it's also, you know, the idea of something that's quite beautiful and something that's kind of repulsive as well too, and just kind of pulling everything together, you know, whether it's this invasive species that's kind of made its way and kind of called it its home within their environment. You know, it seems to be kind of placed there and thrives. And so Makeshift kind of evolves from this idea of taking something that's kind of, I wouldn't say fabricated, maybe in the kind of greater perspective of things, it's fabricated, but it comes from something that's somewhat real and then kind of placed in this, you know, fictitious environment, and then it just kind of thrives. So there's a disconnection, but there's also a connection as well too.